At a family dinner, my mother said that she was ready to sacrifice me for my sister, as her life is more important for the society. I would give my son for her. She's what the world needs. My mother said it like it was a simple fact. I looked across the table, waiting for someone to react, but the room stayed quiet. My sister kept her eyes on her plate. My father, as always, said nothing. My mother didn't even notice how her words hit me. She just went back to eating, as if she hadn't just made it clear who mattered more to her. I felt my hands clench under the table. You would sacrifice me for her? She met my eyes without hesitation. Yes. My sister, Victoria, has always been the star of the family. She's the eco-activist, the vegan influencer with a growing online following, and the person my mother can't stop talking about. If there's a local environmental rally, Victoria's the one organizing it. If a shelter needs volunteers, she's there with her sleeves rolled up. She gives speeches at high schools about sustainability and writes blog posts about living a zero-waste lifestyle. And my mother eats it up. She's changing the world, she always says. Not everyone gets to leave such an important mark. Every achievement of Victoria's feels like a win for my mother too. It's not just pride. It's obsession that I'm different. I work at a marketing firm, managing social media campaigns for medium-sized brands. I don't hate my job, but it's not my passion either. I've always been someone who values stability and long-term goals. I want a comfortable life, a house, a family of my own. I'm not looking to change the world. I'm just trying to live a good life. But in my mother's eyes, that's the problem. She sees my ambitions as small and insignificant compared to Victoria's. It's like everything I do is weighed against this invisible scale, and I'm always found lacking. When we were kids, the favoritism didn't feel like a big deal. My mother helped Victoria with her homework, but I was independent, so I didn't mind doing mine alone. Victoria got extra praise when she did well in school, but I told myself it didn't matter as long as I kept up my good grades. But as we got older, the differences became impossible to ignore. Victoria could do no wrong, and when she did, it was quickly excused. Meanwhile, I had to work twice as hard just to get a passing acknowledgement. When I got into college, my mother's reaction was lukewarm. "That's great," she said, then asked what Victoria had planned for her gap year. When I landed my first job, she congratulated me but quickly pivoted to talking about Victoria's internship at an environmental nonprofit. Eventually, I stopped trying to impress her. I convinced myself that I didn't care. But after last night's dinner, I realized that part of me still does. Growing up, I didn't realize how deep the favoritism ran. I thought it was just small differences. Victoria needing more help because she was younger, or our mom being proud of her because she was more outgoing. But looking back, it's clear that my mother always saw Victoria as the one with potential and me as the one who would turn out fine on my own. When Victoria wanted to join the debate club in middle school, my mom would rearrange her schedule to drive her to practices and competitions. When I wanted to play soccer, I was told that it was too much to fit into the family schedule. When Victoria got a B on a test, my mom helped her create flashcards and quizzed her after dinner. When I brought home straight A's, she'd say, "Good job," and leave it at that. It wasn't just about school. Victoria got the bigger birthday parties, the more expensive gifts, and the extra attention at family gatherings. But the biggest difference wasn't what I received compared to her. It was how she was treated when things went wrong. When Victoria got caught sneaking out one night during high school, my mom said, "She's a teenager. It happens." When I missed curfew by 10 minutes, I got a lecture about responsibility. When Victoria crashed the family car, my mom said, "It's just a car. She's safe, and that's what matters." When I dented the side of the car backing out of the driveway, I had to pay for the repair out of my own pocket. Victoria and I weren't close growing up. I think part of me resented how easily things came to her, how she didn't have to fight for attention or approval. But it wasn't her fault, and I know that now. The real problem was our mother's endless pedestal placing. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a constant reminder that in her eyes, Victoria was destined for greatness, and I was destined to be her supporting act. Over time, I learned to keep my distance. I went to college out of state and barely came home for holidays. I didn't hate my family, but being home always reminded me of where I stood, in the shadow of my sister. When I did visit, it was always the same routine. My mother talking about Victoria's latest accomplishments while my achievements were acknowledged briefly and dismissed. But last night was different. Last night, she didn't just ignore me. She made it clear that I was worth less. Last night's dinner felt like any other family gathering at first. My mother had invited a few aunts, uncles, and cousins over. We were all seated around the long dining table, passing dishes of mashed potatoes and roasted vegetables while the conversation naturally gravitated toward Victoria. It always did. So, Victoria, my aunt said, setting down her glass of wine, tell us about the award you won. I glanced at Victoria, who smiled modestly. It's nothing major. Just a local environmental group recognizing some of my work. My mother jumped in, her face lighting up. Nothing major? She's being modest. They only give this award to people making real, measurable change. It's a big deal. And that's not all. She was also invited to speak at a sustainability conference next month. Oh, wow, my uncle chimed in. What an honor. I kept my eyes on my plate, silently eating as the conversation went on without me. This was normal. I had perfected the art of nodding along without actually engaging, waiting for it to be over. Then, out of nowhere, my uncle turned to me. And you? How's work going? I was about to answer when my mother, without missing a beat, cut in. He's doing fine. Nothing too exciting. She laughed lightly, like it was a joke, but no one else laughed. My jaw tightened. I forced a smile and tried to move on, but she wasn't done. I mean, let's be honest, she continued. What Victoria is doing is the kind of work that really matters. She's making a difference. That's what the world needs. I put my fork down, my appetite suddenly gone. The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the first time she had dismissed my career, but this time, it felt different. Maybe because it was in front of everyone. Maybe because I wasn't sure I could keep pretending it didn't bother me. And then she said it. I would give my son for her. She's what the world needs. The room fell silent. I felt like the air had been sucked out of it. My uncle shifted awkwardly in his seat. My aunt stared at me with wide eyes, but she didn't speak. My father, predictably, kept eating, as if he hadn't heard what was said. Victoria didn't say anything either. She just stared down at her plate. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to say something, to call out how insane that statement was. But no one did, and I tried to swallow the lump in my throat and keep my composure. You would sacrifice me for her? I asked, my voice quiet but steady. My mother met my eyes without hesitation. Yes. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting for my reaction, but I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and left the room. I didn't trust myself to stay. I walked out of the dining room and into the hallway, my mind racing as I grabbed my coat. I could hear the faint hum of conversation picking back up behind me, as if my exit was just another part of the evening. No one called after me. No one stopped me. The weight of what just happened hit me harder with every step. My mother had made her stance crystal clear. She valued Victoria's contributions to society more than she valued me as a person. My chest tightened as I slipped on my shoes, trying to process the reality of her words. Just as I reached for the front door, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Victoria standing there, her face tense, like she was trying to figure out what to say. For a second, I thought she might apologize, that she might acknowledge the damage that had been done. Instead, she said, I didn't know she was going to say that. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. But you didn't say anything to stop her. Victoria hesitated. You know how she is. She says things without thinking. That wasn't just saying something, Victoria, I replied, my voice cold. She told me to my face that I'm worth less than you. And you just sat there. She rubbed her arm awkwardly, looking down at the floor. What do you want me to say? I can't control what she says. No, I said. But you could have spoken up. You could have said that what she said was wrong. But you didn't. Victoria fell silent. I wanted her to argue, to fight back, to give me some reason to believe she understood how much this hurt. But she didn't. She just stood there, and her silence said more than any apology could. I'm not blaming you for how she treats me, I added, swallowing hard. But you've been the center of her world for so long that you don't even notice when she hurts me. Victoria looked up, her eyes finally meeting mine. I never asked to be the favorite, you know? Mom's expectations, it's exhausting. Sometimes, I feel like I can't breathe. I stared at her, torn between anger and sympathy. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she didn't enjoy being the golden child, that she wasn't just sitting comfortably on the pedestal our mother had built for her. But after tonight, it was hard to know what to believe. You're not the only one who feels like that, I said quietly. We stood there in silence, the weight of years of unspoken resentment hanging between us. Finally, I turned back to the door and opened it. I need to go. Victoria didn't stop me. I stepped outside and let the door close behind me, The cold night air hit me as I stepped outside, but it wasn't enough to cool the heat in my chest. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel, closing the door with more force than I intended. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I stared out the windshield, watching my breath fog up the glass. My mother's words were stuck on replay in my head. I would give my son for her. I thought about all the times I brushed off her favoritism. The family dinners where she praised Victoria's every accomplishment while mine went unnoticed. The time she offered unsolicited advice about how I should be more like Victoria. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need her approval. But tonight, she had taken it to a level I couldn't ignore. I pulled out my phone and saw a missed call from Victoria. She had left a voicemail, but I didn't listen to it. What could she possibly say to make this better? I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes, memories flooding in. I thought about the time I won first place in a science fair when I was 12. I was so proud, hoping my mom would be impressed. But all she said was, "That's nice. Did you hear Victoria got chosen to play the lead in the school play?" I thought about when I graduated college. I stood on that stage, hoping to see her beaming with pride. But she spent the ride home talking about how Victoria was going to make a real difference in the world with her environmental work. And no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. I was never enough. I opened my eyes and exhaled slowly, forcing myself to calm down. I wasn't a kid anymore. I didn't have to keep hoping for her approval. But knowing that and feeling it were two different things. I could pretend all I wanted that her words didn't matter, but deep down, they did. I sat in the silence, wondering if this was the breaking point. If this was the moment I finally cut ties and stopped coming to family dinners altogether. But part of me wasn't ready to make that decision yet. Part of me was still clinging to the hope that maybe things could change. But how do you fix something that's been broken for so long? I sat in the car for what felt like forever, the engine off, the silence pressing down on me. Every time I tried to push the memory of her words out of my head, they came rushing back. I would give my son for her. It wasn't just what she said. It was the way she said it, like it was obvious, like it wasn't even a difficult choice for her. My fingers tapped against the steering wheel as I debated what to do next. I could go back inside and confront her, demand an explanation, force her to understand how much she had hurt me. But deep down, I knew how that would go. She'd brush it off, say I was being too sensitive, and turn it around on me. She always did that. I thought about Victoria. Her half-hearted attempt to talk to me before I left wasn't enough to erase years of silence on her part. But what she said stuck with me. I never asked to be the favorite. I believed her, but that didn't change the fact that she had benefited from it. Even if she didn't ask for it, I wondered if she ever really felt the weight of our mother's favoritism the way I did. She said it was exhausting, but she had the luxury of calling it exhausting. For me, it had been isolating. I wasn't sure which was worse. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contact list until I reached my mom's name. My thumb hovered over the call button. Part of me wanted to call her, to demand an apology, to finally tell her how I'd felt all these years. But I knew better. If she hadn't seen it by now, she never would. I closed the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat, frustrated with myself for even considering it. I knew the truth. My mother wasn't going to change. She didn't think she had done anything wrong. To her, Victoria was the future, and I was just a part of the family that would support that future in the background. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, anger bubbling up again. Why did I care so much? Why couldn't I just walk away and let it go? Because she was my mother, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, I had spent my entire life wanting her approval. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the dark sky through the windshield. I wasn't going to get it. Not now, not ever. But maybe, just maybe, I didn't need it anymore. I turned the key in the ignition, the car roaring to life. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay parked there. Drowning in my thoughts, I drove aimlessly for a while, the streets quiet and empty. The glow of streetlights passed by in a blur as I tried to clear my head. But no matter how far I drove, my thoughts stayed with me. I thought about what would happen if I confronted my mother. Would she apologize? Would she even understand why I was upset? Probably not. She would do what she always did, defend Victoria, downplay my feelings, and remind me that family sticks together. That phrase had been her go-to whenever I brought up anything remotely uncomfortable. But what did it even mean when she had made it so clear that I wasn't part of the family she prioritized? Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a small park, turned off the car, and sat there in the dark. The cool night air seeped through the cracks in the windows, Grounding me, I pulled out my phone and opened Victoria's message. I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I stared at it for a while, debating whether to respond. I could tell her exactly how I felt, how her silence hurt just as much as our mother's words. But what would it change? She was caught in the same web of expectations and favoritism, just from the other side. Instead of replying, I opened a new message, but this time it wasn't to Victoria. It was to a close friend I hadn't spoken to in a while. Someone who knew the complicated history I had with my family and always told me that I didn't have to keep putting myself through this. You were right, I typed. I can't keep doing this. I think it's time to let go. I hit send and leaned back, exhaling deeply. I wasn't sure what letting go meant yet. Maybe it meant cutting off contact for a while. Maybe it meant setting boundaries that I should have put in place years ago. Maybe it meant finally stopping the fight to be seen. But whatever it meant, I knew I couldn't keep waiting for something that wasn't coming. My mother wasn't going to wake up one day and see me as her equal to Victoria. And as much as it hurt to admit, it was time to stop waiting for that moment. I started the car again and headed home, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about how to fix things or how to earn someone's approval. I was thinking about what I needed to do for myself. And maybe that was the first step toward moving on.